and I will read them aloud for his response. With that, let's get started, and I will turn it over to our President-elect, John Verrico.
Good morning, everybody. This is John Verrico, and I wanted to welcome you. This is a very exciting opportunity for us. As you know, engaging citizens is always a challenge for us as government communicators. As a matter of fact, that's going to be the focus of our school, the NAGC Communications School, in April. And we were reaching out and looking to try and find some people who can talk really knowledgeably about the challenges involved in engaging citizens in any sort of activity. And we reached out to Admiral Beck because, of all people, he really understands the significant challenge on how to try to engage people. If you think we have challenges here on a day-to-day basis, trying to engage citizens into taking some sort of action, whether it's renewing their driver's license or paying their utility bills or taking cover for a storm, just trying to get people to take a call to action is a great challenge. But try to imagine doing that if the people that you're trying to reach hate you. They don't speak your language. A lot of them are illiterate, and you're the occupying force in a war-torn area. Admiral Beck, who I've known for many years, actually, being a fellow Navy reservist myself, has had 28 years in the Navy as a public affairs officer, and he is the Vice Chief of Information for the Navy. So he is the Reserve CHINFO, for those of you who are familiar with that term. He spent time in both Afghanistan and Iraq organizing the community relations and engagement efforts. And so I'd like to turn it over now to Admiral Beck. And welcome aboard, Vic. Great to see you again.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Let's see if we can get our slides up here.
Have you turned the
yeah,
turn it back over to us?
Oh, there we go.
And we are on.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much for having me. I did put both of my titles up there. So as a Navy reservist, I'm the Vice Chief of Information for our Navy. And that's what I do part-time, though it's a very robust part-time job, if you will. But in my other life, I'm a PR guy. So I've been in PR agencies and corporations for about 20 years. So you have both perspectives, which really, quite frankly, helped me in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I want to talk today a little bit about, we're going to go through some things. I'm going to throw a lot of things out at you. But we're going to open up for questions at the end. So we'll do our best to address everything, any questions that you have within the time allotted, and then if we run over, we'll figure out how to answer your questions beyond this anyway. But I just want to walk through a few things, and I'll give you some thoughts for this particular crowd. And I love talking to fellow communicators because you understand the business of communication. And so I built this presentation specifically for this group of folks. So why don't we get right into it? So I'll go to the second slide here. Just to give you a perspective, and I think it's important, two things really. I was in both wars. The time period is important as well, because one of the things about certainly wartime, as soon as you step out of the country and go back to the United States or go home, whatever, you're out of touch, if you will. It is such a dynamic, changing environment that really is a daily thing. So when you're in it, you're in it. When you're out, if you will. And so I gave you the time periods of when I was there, which was really the surge in Iraq and the surge in Afghanistan. But what's also relevant is my position and where I was. So there are hundreds of public affairs officers at different levels within doing all kinds of different things in both of those countries at any given time. But I was at the headquarters level. So at the headquarters level, you do have a little bit more control, power, and authority, if you will, to ensure that the communicators within the country are synchronized. And that really was a key piece of what I had responsibility for. And I'll talk a bit about that because I think that's a key element of how you synchronize and align your communication is critical to reaching your actual audience. So, with that being said, not unlike any given situation or campaign, you need to define what those communication goals are. At a very basic level, in Afghanistan particularly, and I'll go back and forth a little bit throughout the presentation of Iraq and Afghanistan and give you a couple of different examples. But most recently was Afghanistan, so the majority of this is Afghanistan. But so very, very basically, those communication goals in the war in Afghanistan right now really is about increasing those public perceptions for the Afghan people, and that's what I'm really talking about here. We're talking about the Afghans. Of course, in both wars, we were trying to reach people around the world, Americans and other troop contributing nations, NATO countries. But for this purposes of this presentation, it's about reaching the Afghans and reaching the Iraqis. So the people in those countries. You really want to ensure that you're trying to reach a population so they not just really understand what the occupying force, if you really want to say that, but we weren't an occupying force. We were a force that was invited there to help quell the situation with an enemy. And so, but it's really about gaining support for the government of those countries. And so that was really a key thing. And then, of course, how to undermine the insurgents' messaging, which they don't play by any rules, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. So I came up with this chart because I think it's really very to kind of simplify a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about your message, which is an important piece. I'm not going to focus a whole lot on that. We'll talk a little bit about it, but every message is going to be different. So as communicators, we build messaging based on a variety of different things, research, and so it will always be different depending on the situation. Aligning and synchronizing, as I mentioned earlier, I will talk a bit about that because it's so critical to your success. Delivery channels, also very important because every situation is going to be a little different on how you reach your audience. And then fourth is really measuring and adjusting because nothing happens, it doesn't stand still. You have to continually look at it and adjust. And then, of course, everything, you always have a competing message, regardless of whether it's an enemy's message, whether it's a competition of something else to take up your audience's time, whether it's your audience's apathy. I mean, there are a number of ways to look at competing messages on things that affect your ability to reach your audience. So, without any further ado, we'll get right into your message. This slide, this is a little screen grab from exactly what were the lines of operation in Afghanistan. Again, it might be modified a little bit today. It's been a year and a half since I've been in country, but it's probably about the same. And you can see on the left-hand side, you know, we've got protect the population, the 6 line. There are 6 lines of operation. If you go right down the side there. But all the way on the left-hand side, what's really important is across all of the different lines of operation, you've got understand the operational environment. And then I put in a circle around strategic communication. And that's the communication element to all of these things. I just want to share with the next slide. I simplified it a little bit even more. And that here is your line of operation on the left-hand side. But you have to have a desired result from a communication result. So we'll just focus on the one here for discussion's sake. So line of operation, protect the population. Well, there are a number of things that we are doing in Afghanistan to protect the population. There are from operational, there are battles, there are fights, there's security, all kinds of things. But the desired communication result is to have the Afghans perceive that their daily lives to be safe. So, and that applies across the board here. But so again, for the purposes of this discussion, it's not about the war. It's about what the desired communication result is. And there are many, many things that have to happen. So it's not just communication. You have to be doing the right things, carrying out the rules of engagement during wartime, any number of different things. So it's not the communication piece is not in and of itself in isolation the only thing that's going to help us win this war, by the way. And maybe that goes without saying. So, but I want to move on a little bit to the next slide and talk a little bit about some of the key things from a communication standpoint that were relevant. One of the things we always try to do was to be first with the truth. The challenge, certainly in any wartime situation, is there are enormous amounts of actions, battles, situations, tense situations that are happening constantly. So when if you take it, for example, in the middle of the night, there are all kinds of different operations that happen. And if the Taliban would come out with something that says, well, hey, there was something that happened and 3 civilians were killed. They just claim it. Even if they're wrong, and they do lie, okay, they don't follow the same rules. They don't. The challenge was that they were always playing catch up to correct the record, where they've already put something out into the media space, and we know in today's world it's hyper connected, it's immediate. The first with the truth was what our mantra was. We live by that constantly. The challenge always is that, and for those of you that know, operational reporting is almost never correct or not complete after an operation happens in the middle of the night, because bits and pieces of information come filtering in. So it's challenging. And sometimes we have to put something out, it's not complete and it's really a snippet. But to be first with what's happening, that's when your readers and listeners are going to follow and attach to that. So it's really, really critical, certainly in both wars, to ensure that you're first with the truth. Second really important piece is to ensure that your message is delivered in a manner that your audience will receive it. The Afghans are not necessarily speaking English, and so we have cultural sensitivities as well to always take in consideration. The other 3 things are very, really important, and that's context, characterization, and accuracy. Having your message in the wrong context just helps skew it a little bit more. But the challenge is to provide enough context so you understand the communication of what you're trying to achieve. And the right characterization of what it is also important, and then, of course, being accurate. And the bottom right-hand side, you see there, it's really the challenge was always to attempt to control the narrative by aligning your words, actions, and images. Actions is the tough piece. I can write words all day. I can show you great pictures all day. But if the things that are happening on the ground are not aligned with those things, then the challenge is that your audience is going to be very, very skeptical. So I want to talk a little bit about again, from as communicators, one of the key, most essential pieces of this whole thing is really to align your communication effort. So when I showed up in Afghanistan, for example, the war had been going on just about 10 years. So it's not like I'm going to create a whole new communication plan. There are hundreds of communicators that came before me that did great work and are doing serving their country in a war and doing the best they can. So you have to take that perspective in any given situation where you came in. And so what I initially did was go, okay, well, what are we doing now? How are we communicating? And I'll tell you a little war story. It's kind of interesting. I showed up at the headquarters, and we had 3 or 4 products that were being produced and pushed to various different communicators in country. And my question was, well, why are we doing so many different products? And who's creating them? And how do they know whether they have the right information? Look, I know how to get the right information. It's from the boss. It's from the 4-star. What that boss wants to communicate is critical. And this one young soldier said to me, he said, well, and it was great. By the way, the material was fantastic. It was written well. It seemed really in line. And I said, well, where are you getting all this information? He goes, well, it's the ideas I come up with that we need to talk about. I go, oh, okay. Where do you get that? Well, I don't really know. And then he also said, I said, well, who gets it? He goes, well, these 12 people over here. I go, how did they be the one? Why are they the ones? He said, well, they wanted it. So there were a couple, this soldier was doing the very best he could, wasn't getting a whole lot of guidance from senior leaders. So my initial assessment was, okay, let's get rid of all these products. Let's have one product from the headquarters, distributed weekly, ideally at the same exact time. So because people, I don't care whether you're a soldier or whether you're a civilian, it doesn't matter. People are like Pavlov's dog. If I give it to you Tuesday at noon, eventually you're going to start going, hey, I want it Tuesday at noon. Where's my product? I need this. And so you build readership, viewership, just like you would anything else. So I treat public affairs messaging kind of like, here's my publication, and you're going to get it at the same time every day. The challenge with that also is that you have to have relevant content that's important and that will resonate with your audience. So anyway, the second piece of that was really roles, responsibility, and processes. It's just like anything. As a reserve officer, I really a businessman in my other life, and I treat my military service like a business. So there's a process for this. There's efficiencies. These are the way we have to operate in order to achieve our end goal. So I approached my military service that way. So I wanted to understand what the roles and responsibilities and processes are for our communication to reach an audience. That's the Then the second piece really is, or the third piece there is internal planning. So you do have champions. We have all kinds of people within NATO headquarters that have a say in what we're talking about. But you need to build people that are your champions to support this. Because in any organization, the communicator, the head public affairs officer, you're not the person in charge. It's just a fact of life. However, you are the person that's telling everybody else what to say and how to say it. So you have some important relevancy, but if you don't have the support of the senior leaders, senior VPs, executive VPs, secretaries, whatever, you will not have the people to support that you as the communicator in charge. And that's really the goal. You have to have the respect of the other people within your organization in order to be effective. So, and then the last piece was really, okay, you live in your own world, in your own bubble. After you've got your plan, vet it with somebody outside your organization. Most communicators in this kind of role that I'm in, I couldn't have done it when had been in the business for 2 years. As John said, I've got 28 years of doing it. So I have all kinds of folks that I've trusted confidants over the years, and they're my mentors, and I go back to them all the time for, hey, what do you think of this? So I want to show you the next slide as an example of audiences, and this is not a joke actually, but I'm not going to focus on this, but I wanted to give you an example of how challenging it is to identify audiences. I won't dwell on this. This was a real slide that someone was sharing about, and DCOSCOM in the middle, by the way, that's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Communication at the headquarters in Afghanistan. And actually, all those audiences are actually relevant. And I know there are a lot of acronyms in alphabet soup, and that's okay. Don't worry about any of them. They don't matter for the purpose of this discussion. But let me show you the next slide. And they're also acronyms, but let me explain a little bit more. This is how I could digest it, for goodness sakes. It was way too much before. So the green are all military folks in country. So that are, again, the acronym, so the TF is a task force, and in order to make sure that I could present all this stuff, some things are classified, so if I just say task force 1 or task force 2, it doesn't really matter. But for the purpose of this discussion, there are various communicators and lead communicators in all of these organizations in each box. And so the green ones are all in country. The red ones are all military, with the exception of the U.S. Embassy in the top left corner, are all military folks out of country, elsewhere. So NATO HQ is Brussels, for example. ODRP is actually in Pakistan. CENTCOM is down in Tampa. So as an example, they all are players in this too. But the critical piece here are the blue ones. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in another slide, because those are the Afghans. And the Afghans are, the GMIC is the Government Media Information Center. MOI is the Ministry of the Interior, the police. MOD is the Ministry of Defense, and NDS is their CIA equivalent. So let me actually go to the next slide. Oh, as an example, this is a slide from of a poster that I actually made in Iraq. I ran the Media Operations Center, and it was a beehive. I mean, it was constant activity, and you can see there what we did. But people came in all the time, and this was directed to my internal audience. And they go, wow, what are you guys doing? It's like the news. It's, we have media monitors with TV screens all over the place. And I thought, what better opportunity to tell people exactly what we're doing here. So they would understand, again, internal audience, they'd walk away and understanding what it was that we did, instead of us having to always talk with them, explain ourselves. So I just built a poster of our mission statement and put it on the wall as an example. Another way to reach your internal audience and get them aware of you. So the last piece, I think this is the last slide on aligning and synchronizing. So this is on the left is an example of our message guidance that we put out once a week. So we branded it a little bit as HQ in the top right corner. But another really important piece of this, because people come and people go in war all the time, was the box in the top. It never changed. It's the mission of the International Security Assistance Force. It's a key message. People need to understand your mission. After you've been in a war for 10 years, there are Afghans that don't even know why you're there anymore. It is, people come and people go. You have to constantly re-educate people. So really, really important. And then on the right-hand side, just a few things that we did as the communicators in country that you would do in any situation. Regular teleconferences, provide message guidance. But the bottom one there is, I think, really the most critical piece. And as the headquarters, I thought it was my responsibility and our responsibility to really be conscious about knowledge sharing. Check your egos at the door, folks. This is not about that. It's about sharing information to ensure that we're synchronizing our communication to reach our audiences. So, now I'll talk a little bit about some delivery channels. I think John mentioned it up front, and that is that the Afghan is a tough place to be. It's a tough place to live if you're an Afghan or whoever you are. If the literacy rate, these numbers might be a little dated. They are a little dated, so that's really just about 2 years ago. So I don't know the current numbers, but they're probably pretty close to right. And so the challenge is that how do you reach your audience? In Afghanistan, it's word of mouth. That is the way you reach people. And so, well, how do you get to the people that disseminate those words? A lot of folks listen to radio. So radio is a primary channel. Radio is not a primary channel in the United States, as an example. It used to be, right? But times have changed. But with less than 1% penetration of internet access, it's challenging. So you have to understand your audience and what they actually are engaged in, how they get their information, and then utilize, obviously, those channels. This is a screen grab, actually, from the website, and actually, I encourage you all to go take a look at it. This is the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's GMIC. The GMIC is our State Department built this with the Afghans, but we funded it, and so the Afghans run this, and I took people on my staff and assigned them on a regular basis to go to the communicators within the GMIC, because the reality is simple. Afghans communicating to Afghans are a whole lot more effective than U.S., Germans, Australians. Name the NATO. Australians are not a NATO country, but they're a troop contributing nation, and they're helping in this fight. Anybody except Afghans communicating to Afghans is going to be harder, guaranteed. And so this was a way for us to share information. I'll share with you also then in the next slide here on what we really did, because this was a critical channel. This was the best way to reach the Afghan people. So again, JAROA acronym, Government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. This was the primary way that those folks actually got information. They reached the government of Afghanistan, those different entities, as I said, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, NDS, and POA, which is President of Afghanistan, so Hamid Karzai's spokesperson. Those were the spokespeople that we engaged mostly. So we provided constant, every morning, my guys, we'd sit through our brief, and then they'd deploy and go to these locations. They were all centrally located in Kabul to go engage and say, hey, here's what happened last night. Here's how we are describing what happened. This is how we determine what happened. These are our key talking points about it here. And it was not, here, go tell people. It was not, here, I want you to talk to people about this. Look, they have their own country, their own government. The key was to have respect from them too. They're a key audience, as I said before. Our relationship with the Afghans is critical to ensuring that they communicate whatever they want, quite frankly. But this is what we said happened, because the Taliban are going to come back with something else. We'll talk about them in a minute. But that's the critical piece to this whole thing, was how do you give them information to ensure that they have what we say? Because they have some of the same operational reporting, but it's not the same as us. We have a whole lot more resources than they do in order to have an understanding of what's going on the ground. Not a single operation happens at night without Afghans involved. The Afghan special forces are completely engaged with our special forces, and they're going and having these operations on a regular basis. But their lines of communication back to the GMIC, MOD, MOI, quite frankly, weren't as strong as ours, or mature, which makes perfect sense if you understand the country. So that's how we helped as best we could to help them understand what we did in any given situation. Fourth piece, as I talked about a little bit, as I mentioned up front, is measure and adjust. And these are a little sanitized, so I had to sanitize a couple of these. I apologize, but you could get a sense of things. So, for example, this is a month period of time. This is actually Iraq. There were always erroneous stories in the Iraqi press, and so in order to really understand it, I mean, it can't just be, oh well, they're not telling the truth. Well, what we did was we engaged every single one of these erroneous stories with the publications. And so to ensure over time that the erroneous stories would decrease. There was another factor of erroneous stories that was being decreased, as I mentioned earlier. It's not just communication. Our forces were taking out some of their media cells at the same time. So they contributed to the decrease of erroneous stories for sure. But you have to have a measurement of it. And it's complicated. So there are a lot of people that were monitoring the Iraqi press as we looked at it, and we had the same thing in Afghanistan as well. But this slide is from Afghanistan, and it's really a perception of your audience. So, and you have to understand whether your message is actually resonating. In this case, the Afghans were thinking that the government of Afghanistan is the key to improving security, and not uncommon. If you look at the bottom there, the foreign forces, that's us. They thought 10% folks it was us. Understand the environment we're in. Understand the illiterate population that we have. So that's okay. We support the government of Afghanistan, so we were okay with these things. It's not about us and what we're doing. It is about what we're doing. But that message and what's being perceived, that's okay.
I find it amusing that the foreign forces and nobody were running neck and neck.
Yeah.
In the perception.
It's really some of the statistics we saw aren't really astonishing, but I guess in the end, what really matters is, are we able to save lives? Are we able to protect the population? Are we able to do these things and leave, quite frankly, because we're not going to be there forever. There may be somebody there forever, but it's the Afghans. It's their country, not ours. And so that's the goal, was to defeat the insurgents more than anything, which is the #1 mission. So, and then really, so talked about this a little bit already. Really, it's really whether you're being effective or you're reaching your audiences. I'll talk a little bit about informing and educate versus influence. So those of you who know that in foreign countries and foreign lands, there's information operations, psychological operations are things that our military and other militaries do to influence really against the enemy, to position the government and against the enemy. That is not what I'm talking about. That is not public affairs. Public affairs is inform and educate. All straight, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. My goal was to ensure that everything was as accurate as possible. That's what we tried to do. And then just a couple of things that I think are really important is there's no absolute recipe for how to do all this. And I say don't change for change's sake, because look, I came in after 10 years of war. It doesn't mean that anybody was doing it wrong. And if I came in and wanted to put my stamp on it, well, I'm a fool, because it's not about my stamp. It's about the mission. It has nothing to do with Vic. It has to do with whether we're doing the right things to achieve the end goal. That's always about that. So competing messages, I mean, you probably could have guessed most of these things. They do this, in this particular case, the competing message, of course, is about the Taliban and the Haqqani network and other terrorist network cells in that country. And they are they don't have any rules. They're driven by their own personal agenda. And I'll be very, very clear. They lie. They lie constantly. They lie because they can still get a story in the New York Times. And I can't tell you how often, or any Western outlet, here's what we say, and then, well, if a journalist is truly trying to do their job and to give a balanced story, well, this is the opposite side. So it's not like, HP and Microsoft. Sorry, no, it's frustrating, because they're lying about the situation when we know what actually happened in any given situation, and they're lying about it, and they get some awareness in the press for what they're doing. um, and it, which is frustrating, but that's the way it goes. So you have to understand those dynamics and deal with it. And the last piece there is social media. They're very astute, and then they're not reaching the Afghans necessarily through social media. They're reaching some. As we know, there's not a whole lot of access to that in the country, but they use social media to reach ABC, the news outlets all the time, and they will tweet to them, "Hey, we just did this," or whatever. So they're all kinds. They're astute, at least in understanding the power of social media, because that's how you get immediate information to reporters to get their message across. So I'll give you this slide really is a snapshot of the contrast between ISAF forces and the insurgents. So just as an example, so in the top right-hand corner there, you've got Al Qaeda in the east there. So Al Qaeda and affiliates exploit for safe haven, and you can see the other ones too. It's really that ring around Afghanistan. So there's their objectives, and then let's see if I can get my slide's not working now. Oh, there it is. Sorry. And then to deny the safe havens, that was our objectives in the same areas to do those same kinds of things. So, there will be competing messages in every given situation. These are our operations and our objectives in those areas. So, and really kind of as a summary slide here, just to give you some kind of top level thoughts, and these I think apply in most situations. Certainly not just in Afghanistan or Iraq, but really got to manage and work the expectations of your internal audience to ensure that you can be successful in your external. Look, it's never about anything in the end other than your audience. If your audience isn't receiving your message, you fail. So you can work on a press release all day long, and it could be almost Pulitzer worthy, but if it doesn't leave in a timely manner to reach your audience with a message at the time when they need to receive it or ready to receive it, then it's a failure. So the other thing, as I said before, first with the truth is almost in any given situation. And particularly in the Navy, we've always had that mantra of maximum disclosure, minimum delay, and that's what you want to be able to do. Give as much information as you possibly can in as short a period of time, while trying to be first with that truth. It's a constant struggle to align reality with perception, especially in foreign lands, when no matter how savvy someone could be, an American who's been in Afghanistan, no matter whatever they think they know about the people of Afghanistan, if they're not an Afghan and you're not born and raised in that country, you don't know. And we've all kinds of experts doing all kinds of great things, but you can only see the world through your own lens, and that's a fact of life. So no matter who you are. Empower the host nation to take the communication lead. That's the most effective way to do it, because they're talking to their own folks. You've heard the old catchphrase, there's no I in team. It's just so incredibly true. It's a team sport, if you will, and it's just really, really critical to ensure that you continue to operate that way to ensure you're successful. The last thing really is, and it's so important, is that it's not about winning. It's about doing the things that you're supposed to do, because that's your mission. As the communicator, as the lead communicator in these wars, or one of the leads, then my job was to ensure that it was synchronized. It was to do the best I could. It wasn't just, here, go lead this. It was to ensure that we can do the best we can to be effective to reach our audience. So I'll leave you with that. And I've got, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all that kind of stuff. So anybody who's participating, we're happy to engage in dialogue at any point in time beyond this. And so I think I'll leave it there.
And Vic, are you the owner of the Strategic Communications group on LinkedIn?
I am, actually. So I started as a group called Strategic Communication on LinkedIn. I started 4 years ago. And quite honestly, I approve people to join, so you're a part of that, and you don't get spammed by other folks. But I don't engage in a whole lot of dialogue there. But there's a lot of dialogue right now, certainly in the military, with the phrase strategic communication and what that means. There's a lot of dialogue there, and for those that have any interest in this particular subject, I think strategic communication within the military is defined a little differently. By the way, when I started that group, I invited a bunch of folks that I know from my agency life because I wanted a dialogue of different perspectives. It's not just a military thing. Strategic communication is being smart in how you communicate, whether you're a company, whether you're an organization, whether you're a government entity, whether you're in the military, it doesn't matter. It's how you align all the components and pieces and parts to effectively reach your audience. Arguably, it's integrated marketing communication, but it's all those different pieces that align together. And so, yeah, anybody's happy to join. So I'll approve you, and if I don't approve you, call me out on it. So,
well, I know that NAGC has participated in some in-depth discussions on strategic communication LinkedIn group. So,
yeah.
Anyway. But I want to thank you, and we're going to turn it back over to Liz here. You made some really brilliant points here, and one of the things I know that I'm going to take home from this is one point that you made, that it's their country, not ours. And I think if we look at that from the perspective of being here back in our own communities and realizing that as government agencies, when we're talking to our constituents, it's their community, not ours. It's their family, not ours. It's their own home, their own life that we are trying to give them guidance on, and we have to keep in mind that we're interfering with their ownership of their own stuff. And so if we keep that in mind in our strategic messaging, I think that helped a lot.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, Liz, we're going to turn this back over to you.
Okay.
And so that we can go through any questions that you may have.
Yes, we do have one question. How much of your communication is driven by input from the public you are trying to reach? In other words, how much is your conversation two-way?
And that's a great point. And so the challenge in Afghanistan was that we had, if you get anecdotal information from your public, it's not as nearly as relevant as the research and stuff that you do to understand what their real true concerns are. So it's not one individual who's complaining. It has to be, because you can't engage everybody. That's the reality, right? But you can engage as much as you possibly can. And if it seems like a bunch of folks are on a bandwagon on a particular issue, then you do want to engage. The reality, quite honestly, is we'd engage as much as we possibly could with individuals. But there are people that you're never going to satisfy. There are people that engage for the purposes of just being just ruffling feathers. So you have to understand really how the relevancy of what that means and the time commitment. Because look, I don't know anybody who's got more resources than they can shake a stick at, right? Everybody's got is resource challenged, and so aren't we in the war. But again, it's how you look at things. I'll give you another example. So we did tweet, for example, in Afghanistan. We tweeted on mostly our press releases and things we were actually going to distribute publicly. And so I had a social media manager, a couple of them, and one said to me that we should be putting our stuff out on Twitter first and then following up the press release. And I said, well, why would we want to do that? They said, well, it's a growing channel, it's important, it's immediate, and these kinds of things. And I said, I agree with you, but it depends on your audience. So the Western and international press, they were all over Twitter. But the Afghan press, including some of the smaller outlets, they weren't there. And so then if I did do that, for example, then it would be like we're giving the Western and international press the information first and then give it to the Afghans. And so the way we were doing it before was we emailed. I mean, sounds archaic to us almost, but I wasn't about to change it because it was about reaching the audience. And the audience in this particular case were the media that then distributed that information. And so I would have heard from some of those smaller outlets or even if I hadn't. That's just not the appropriate way to inform and educate. So I expanded a little bit on the question, but the answer is that answering what the public and what they're looking for, that's part of the job, is to inform and educate without question. but it's a challenge, and you have to be realistic too. So, and I'm certainly not saying that every single person who had something bad to say, we said, "Oh, that's okay, let's talk about it." That's not what we're talking about here. But you do have to understand what's going on in your audience in different areas of the country are different too. So we did the best we could for sure.
Okay, great. That's the only question that I have at this point, unless any of the participants want to type something in, and we'll get that answered for you.
Liz, there was a question that was sent by email.
Okay, great.
So I can read it. It's the Admiral noted that local government lie. Do the citizens know that those counter messages were in fact lies? And if they do know that their own people lie, then why would they trust messages from you, an outsider?
Okay, well, maybe I said that. My intent was that the Taliban lies, so the insurgents lie. That's what I hope I meant to say. Mm-hmm. Now, but that does bring up a very interesting point, and that is so the government of Afghanistan. So you don't have to follow the war very much to look at the government of Afghanistan and say, is this legitimate? Is Hamid Karzai? Is there corruption? And all those kinds of things. You know what the reality is? In my role as the communicator, that's not for me to determine whether they are lying to their people or not. Quite frankly, I don't know, because I don't speak the language. So as much you can't translate everything, but you have to have your own ethics and your own things that we follow to communicate. We would never ever communicate something that's inaccurate on purpose. There's absolutely been a time when I communicated something. I remember it was the Reuters had ran something. It was about Iranian influence, actually, and it was not true. And it didn't come from us. I can't remember where it came from. Someone screwed up. One of the communicators, a junior staff member, screwed up somewhere. I couldn't remember what it was. And they ran with the story, and I called the reporter, the chief of the Reuters, of the bureau there at that time, and I said, "Hey, that's not true." And the AP guys were looking at it going, "Well, that doesn't sound quite right." And so I said, "I'm sorry, we were wrong." And he yelled at me and said, "Oh," and I said, "Okay, last time I checked, I'm human, but I'm sorry, so we're wrong." So they ran a correction. But you got to just say you're wrong. That's okay. We're all human. In fact, that it's funny that chief of the Reuters bureau, he's back in Australia, and we were just Facebooking the other day. We're good friends because it's about common courtesy with each other. But I digress a little bit. So back to the point, though, and the government, again, Afghans talking to Afghans is a whole lot more effective than us talking to the Afghans. It's just the way it is. Same thing with Iraqis. Same thing in any country. In my civilian life, if we're trying to reach the people of South Africa for a particular company doing a product, I want South Africans doing public affairs PR to reach South Africans, not us here from Washington D.C. It just makes a lot of sense to do it that way. More effective.
So if I can translate what I just heard, basically, yeah. It's that in order to get the message out there in a way that is going to be believed and trusted, you use local trusted messengers to help carry that message.
If you can, right, as much as possible, because, and I think actually it's a good point, John, because it's trusted, right, is the piece. It's not just, hey, let's go find some dude to go do this stuff. That doesn't work that way. And so, but how much can you really vet and trust and do all those things? You do the best you can in any given situation. We're constantly building the plane as it flies through the sky. We're constantly doing that as communicators in almost any given situation. Very, very rare are you here. It starts, and so I'll give you one last thing that
It's a brilliant picture, building the plane as it's flying through the sky.
I'll tell you something else that this is a reflection that I've kind of realized after I came back from Afghanistan, and I said, well, 10 years of war, 10 years there. And of course, with us there, it's been a war for a very, very long time prior to us. And so who are we trying to reach? Let's understand the world we live in today. So let's talk a little bit, just to digress for a second, but I think it's a very important point. Outside of Afghanistan and the Afghans, if you're 25 years old or younger, anybody, I don't care where you are on planet Earth, I don't care what country you live in, you know the sky is blue, the grass is green, and there's war in Afghanistan. Meaning that you don't pay attention to the sky unless you're a meteorologist. You don't pay attention to the grass unless you're a greenskeeper. And you don't pay attention to the war in Afghanistan unless you know somebody or somehow you're there yourself in some capacity. That's a tiny percentage. And think about that for a minute. They don't, and they get their news on their device when they want it, on their smartphone, when they want it, if they want it. How do you reach somebody like that? That's an incredible challenge. And so my approach was that you can't just reach them. So you have to. We developed a lot of content ourselves because the press, they're not going to write all the good stories, all the great things we're doing in Afghanistan. So we wrote it ourselves. Is it believable? I don't know. That's not for me to figure out. That's for you, John Q. Public, or whoever, Susie Q. Public, to go assess it yourself if you want to. So we developed a lot of content on what the things that we're doing there, the good things, and that's for people to choose. It's, again, as a public affairs, not PR, not information operations, public affairs, inform and educate. Give people the opportunity to see what we believe, what we think is actually going on. Thank you.
All right. I don't think we have any other questions. John, did you get any other emails?
I do not.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I just want to mention that we will be co-hosting a webinar
Liz,
on February 7th. Yes.
there are 2 more questions that I sent to you. You might not have received them yet. The first is, how can you involve the public in the decisions you and the military are making behind just the Afghan military?
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Well, part of it is again, understand exactly what they need to, what they're asking. The reality is that the public doesn't decide whether we go to war or not, right? That's decided by people above other, the governments. Governments decide those kinds of things. You want to communicate as best as possible what's happening accurately, what's going on the ground. I can tell you there are a number of different times people that are not communicators, people that are from all walks of life, that are in uniform and not just U.S. uniform, to say things to me like, hey, how do we decide that we're winning the war? I go, I'm not going to decide whether we're winning the war. It's an irrelevant question. It's for people to decide whether you're winning the war. My job is to ensure that we communicate what's going on. And so, I mean, we're all human. The example I use is that I can tell you that I have to select somehow what to communicate, obviously, because you don't just make it up. So there are a number of different ways I can tell you. For example, let's see, if I said I had fish for lunch, or I said, no, I had fish and broccoli and rice for lunch, or I said, no, I had grilled mahi-mahi, steamed broccoli, and steamed rice for lunch. There are a number of different ways I can tell you I'm not hungry for lunch. I've already had lunch. So you have to be able to communicate and understand the responsibilities you have to inform people of what their tax dollars are doing or what people are doing in their country. Our job, our mission in that country is to protect the population, to grow the Afghan National Security Forces. That's what we're doing there. And so you do take in consideration what the public is interested in knowing. And if they don't understand, you have to do the best you can to try to communicate to them and answer their questions. We absolutely have that responsibility to do the best you can with it.
Liz, do you have the second question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
How can a communication department engage its public audience without support from executives?
It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, but it happens. I mean, so one of the things about certainly not within the current agency where I am at Burson Marsteller, but some other agencies I've been at, which I'll remain nameless, and I've worked for. That's the one thing about working in agency life. You get to see the inside of so many different companies, and the joke, sorry, is that there are a lot of companies I've seen the inside of. I go, boy, I don't ever want to work there internally. Not the case here, but as a joke. But the challenge is that you've always heard that it comes from the top, and ideally it does, but it doesn't always. And it's a little bit of politics on how you personally, as the communicator, the representative, communicate on behalf of the boss. You know, I work for a company where the CEO hated talking to the press, but there was a senior VP who was the spokesperson. Thank goodness for him. Were we completely in line with the CEO's thoughts and guidance? I think so. And so every situation's a little different. In our business, you got people that know everything about communication. They think they do, and they're the experts. And you've got people that don't know anything about it and don't want to know anything about it. There are people there are CEOs that think it's a necessary evil. I guess we got to talk to our shareholders. Look, it's all different, right? Every situation is different. And in an ideal world, that boss is saying communication is important, and on down it goes, and then everybody understands you're relevant. That's helpful because one of the things I said earlier, right? That communicator, you're not the senior person in the room. You're almost never the senior person in the room. You've got senior VPs that are above you that if they have it in for you as the communicator or the person, that employee, you know, you're on the out. So it's a challenge. So over the years, I've tried to use my communication skills that I've used on behalf of clients for myself internally to talk about the different things. I joke, but it's really no joke. It's never about me. It's about the person I'm talking with, because I want to understand, and if I focus on the other person all the time, a senior executive who doesn't like communication, then usually I win because I get what I need, which is all I really need is support from that person to do the job, to add value. It's really about that. It's more than anything else. You do the best you can. Every situation is different. People have their own personal motivations in any organization. They have their own equities, and every situation is a little bit different. So.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, again, I just want to mention that we are co-hosting an online webinar on February 7th from 10 a.m. to 12 Eastern Standard Time. The host and moderator is former ABC Network News correspondent Barbara Pinto, and she will guide us through an exploration of changes, challenges, and opportunities brought about by the budget, the scandals, and the expanding need for government, the private sector, and academia to communicate and collaborate. And basically, we're going to talk about, in these challenging times and conferences, how do we make them the most effective that we possibly can. And with that, I just want to thank Admiral Beck for participating today. And John, do you want to talk about the NAGC Communication School coming up?
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. First of all, just to add on to what you mentioned about next week's webinar, we are going to be presenting at that webinar as well, be part of the panel about the use of conferences, and that's really what this is going to be about, is how we use conferences or not use conferences as a way to reach our stakeholders. But we just sent out last night a survey for NAGC members and anyone else in the communications field and government communications about how we use conferences. So please take a look at that survey, and it's only 10 questions. Love to get your responses on that. Coming up in April is our communications school. This is our big training event for the year. As I've already mentioned, the theme is on engaging citizens in democracy. Admiral Beck was originally going to be one of our keynote speakers, and unfortunately had a change in his schedule that would not allow him to attend. So I thank you again, Vic, for making the time to still give us your presentation and provide your expertise. We greatly appreciate that in this forum. So kind of consider this a preview to some of the discussions, in-depth discussions we're going to have in April. The agenda is online. The keynote speakers are listed. There are some really incredible pre-conference workshops, some excellent keynote opportunities. We've got a group of science fiction writers going to come and talk to us about trying to overcome the stigma of being Big Brother government. We've got a gentleman from Montenegro coming to talk about how they're facing the challenges of communicating with the public and engaging the public in an area where the public doesn't trust their government because of prior corruption in southeastern Europe. We've got all kinds of other great stuff. We've got a panel on using social media in emergency context. We've got speakers from FEMA, from the Red Cross, and from Fairfax County's fire folks that were a rescue team for all working on Hurricane Sandy. So lots of great stuff. Check out the agenda on www.nagconline.org. And the registration is open, so sign up for it. That's all I got.
Okay, good. Well, I think we're done, and I'd like to, again, just thank everyone for participating, and look to our website for upcoming webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Abel.
Okay.